Good morning. It's good to be here with you. As I was coming to church this morning, I thought, wow, what a privilege it is for me that I can be a part of this group and be here. So that is a big blessing in my life, has been already for many years. Pastor Ronald said, well, if you're ready, you can come and preach. I'm never ready to preach, so I guess I'll just preach to whatever place I am. But yeah, turn with me to Psalm chapter 2. I don't know if you're in a place in your life where you're in a deep personal struggle, then I don't think you'll get an answer for that from this message today. We're studying through the book of Romans together, and we kind of got into it by accident. Feels like 10 years ago, but probably wasn't that long. And we're going through it, and I am learning a lot from it, and I trust you are as well. And we have an interesting front cover of our bulletin today, and I think which is the answer to what we're talking about today. You probably read the verse and saw the American flag on it, so that's quite interesting. And the songs that we sang this morning that Byron led us in, thank you very much. I really enjoyed our singing. Just a beautiful, peaceful part of it, but the songs were so good. Such a good foundation or context for this message. We sang about trusting in Jesus, right? That's what we sang. And we sang, "Be still, my soul, the Lord is on thy side." Right? So very, very good songs as we think about, and I think they are the framework for this message, which is from Romans 13. If you want to start turning there as well, you can. We want to read Psalm 2 before that. But our topic is, we'll start off with, and we'll see how far we get. I'm very determined to finish at 12 o'clock sharp. You can watch that for me. And maybe I'll have to stand up at 12 o'clock so I know when it's 12 o'clock, because sometimes I forget. I just have to say one more thing. And then when I finish saying that thing, it's 10 after 12. So that's one of my problems. But so where are we at here? See, here I'm going again, saying all kinds of things that are not in my script. So I think we were talking about our songs, right? So we sang, "'Tis so sweet to trust in Jesus." So the question is, are you trusting in Jesus? Am I trusting in Jesus? I don't always. And whenever I don't trust in Jesus, then I feel like I have to fight for myself. So that's in that way, it is important that we trust in Jesus, and that is how trusting in Jesus relates to this message. When I can trust in Jesus, when I can trust in God, that there's an all-knowing, all-powerful God, a wise God in heaven who is very much aware of me, then life looks different than if I feel like it's up to me to take care of things by myself. And with that, I'm not saying I don't need to take care of things or we don't need to. I struggle very much with that, and have for, like, where do you know, like, where's the balance between that? But anyway, trusting in God, that is foundational, obviously, to Christianity and also to the topic of Romans 13. And then being still and being at peace. And so that's already a good challenge for us. And so that is a framework for, I think, the thoughts that we want to share, though we won't probably talk very directly about them. But Psalms chapter 2 asks some very good questions. That it says this: "Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing?" So the heathen are godless people who despise God or don't want to know God or just don't know God. So heathen, godless people. Why do they rage? In other words, why are they not at peace? Why are they in turmoil? And the people imagine a vain thing. Why do they think about a useless thing? Why they're upset and raging about something that is useless? That's the question. The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. So there you go. The kings of the earth and the rulers set themselves together. It's not just one king in one country, one ruler over there, he's doing his thing. It says they're all joining together, and they're setting themselves up in council. They're sitting together. They're having a donut session together and saying, how can we defeat the people of God? That's what it's saying, right? The rulers, the kings of the world are sitting together. It's saying, The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord. Not just against his people, against God, and against his anointed. That, I guess, would be Jesus. It could possibly also be us as his people. But let us, and this is their counsel, this is their agreement, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. So this is now God speaking to that meeting, to that group. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath and vex them in his sore displeasure. So this is talking about this stillness. This is talking about the peace, that the trust that you and I are to have. And I think I mentioned it maybe previously over the last several times maybe, but one of the tracks in my mind these days is about the coming judgment of God, or that one day God will execute righteousness on the world, on the earth. And so this is, I guess, I think this psalm is what got me thinking about that. But so verse 5 says, then shall he speak unto them, unto the kings and the rulers who have set themselves against God, in his wrath. So God is going to be wrathful at them, or he is wrathful at them, and vex them in his sore displeasure. What does vex mean? That means he's going to trouble them. They're going to be vexed, frustrated at God. Yet have I set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. So here we're back to talking about the anointed one, about Jesus. I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, thou art my son. This day have I begotten thee. So Jesus, we know God set him on the holy hill of Zion in Jerusalem, and he is now in heaven, in the heavenly Zion, and he has begotten him, right? He is the first begotten of God. And so ask of me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. And so God will one day give Jesus the whole world. And so doesn't Jesus own or rule the world today? Well, I think he could, but there's a time of freedom. We're living in a day of freedom and grace for the whole world. And so one day that will change, and God will execute judgment. So that's what it says here. I will give thee the heathen for thine inheritance. So that also talks about the Gentiles turning to Jesus and salvation, I believe. So the church, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. So that's not talking about the church. That's talking about these rulers, the heathen that are raging, foaming at the mouth against God, taking counsel against God. How are we going to defeat God? How are we going to trouble God? How are we going to vex him? And that is obviously the only way they can do that is by vexing his church. But so there it is. This is the end of them. And so when we read last Sunday, I think it was last Sunday in Romans 12, we just briefly touched on that. It says, God says, vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Those verses there, if you remember them, maybe we can quickly read them later again. There is a judgment coming for those who rage against God. And in this case, it's specifically, directly speaking to the rulers of the world who take counsel against God. Right? So it's a very sobering verse directed at the rulers of this world who hate God. Who is going to give them that message? I don't know. Maybe we're doing that today. But here's what it says. Thou shalt break them. That means talking to Jesus. Jesus will return one day, and he will destroy the Antichrist with the brightness of his coming, and destroy. Like when you see in Daniel that big that statue. Which chapter of Daniel is that? I didn't prepare for that, but we know that statue. What all the parts represented. Right now we're in the part of the world where the two empires, the Eastern Empire and the Western Empire, are represented in the two legs of that statue, and they're at odds with each other, as we see in the news headlines every day. It's the Eastern Roman Empire, or the remnant of it, and the Western remnant of the Roman Empire that are fighting each other today, or at odds with each other. And they have been many times. It's not a special thing in itself. It has happened many times in the past and will continue to happen. The end of that story is that Jesus comes as a rock. There's a rock that comes and he smashes that to pieces, right? To a million gazillion pieces, to dust, right? He destroys it, and then that rock builds up into a kingdom. And so That's what this is talking about them. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Here's the admonition. Listen to this, kings of the earth. Be wise now, O ye kings. Be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. These verses are directly speaking towards the rulers of this world. It says, be wise. Be instructed, you judges of the earth and kings. This is what you're supposed to do. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Be afraid of God, it says. But there's also room for rejoicing. If you fear God, then you can rejoice, it sounds like to me. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and ye perish from the way. Kiss the Son is, I guess, an expression for saying make peace with Jesus. Son is capitalized, it means Jesus. Make peace with Jesus. This verse directly tells the world rulers, make peace with Jesus, lest he be angry and ye perish from the way. When his wrath is kindled but a little, like Jesus' wrath needs to be kindled only a little bit, and you are in big trouble. And when his wrath is kindled but a little, then it says, listen to this verse, this last sentence, how this psalm ends. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. That includes the world rulers. That includes you and me as well. It's an invitation. It's a blessing on those who will choose, or those who choose to put their trust in him. And so this for me is a foundational for the thoughts from Romans 13 that we want to look at. So let's do that. And so what we want to do, just very briefly, is look at and as we know, Romans 13, the first part of it, not the whole chapter, but the first part of it talks about the believer's attitude towards these rulers, towards the rulers of the world. And so we want to talk about, just so we have a context for this, we want to talk a little bit about history. We want to talk a little bit about what was the government of Paul's day, of Jesus' day like. And that could be, obviously, there are many books and a lot of stuff, resources that we could access to learn about that. But let's say a couple of things. So one thing, one situation that they were in, if you want to turn to Romans 13 already, you can. But one situation that the people of Jesus' day, and not just they, Jesus himself found themselves under as far as the rulers, that was the Herod family. The Herod family was ruling Judea and parts of what we often call Israel at the time of Jesus, and already since before that. So that was a family, and there was, when the Bible talks about Herod, there were several different men that were called Herod. It was a whole family. So there was grandfather Herod and father Herod and several sons Herod and brother-in-law Herod or whatever, right? It was a whole Herod family that was ruling, and different ones. And so we don't probably have time to go into all of that, so we'll just lump them all together today. That family was a family in their personal lives, just in horribly immoral people in many ways. Just in the worst case, it would make the governments of our day look pretty good, I think, when we look at the Herod family and study some of the things they were involved with, or personally. They were murderous people. They murdered each other. Their own wives and their own sons had them executed just out of suspicion. Something a little bit that gives us an idea of the power of the Herods was, for example, when Jesus had been born, and Mr. Herod in Jerusalem found out that, there's that king has been born now, supposedly. What did he do? He had all the young boys of Bethlehem killed, right? He could do that. That's the power that he had. There were no repercussions. There were no, as far as we know, nothing against that. That did not touch him politically at all. That's the kind of power these people had. And that's the kind of thing that they could do with no consequences, right? What a horrible thing that is, right? What would happen if that would happen in our country today? It won't, but if it would, how horrible would that be? What would happen? But here was nothing. The people were completely powerless, it tells you, right? All they could do was cry. and be angry. But beyond that, there was nothing for them to do because the power was so absolute, so horrible, so immoral. This is not in the Bible, but secular history tells us that one of the Herods, I'm not sure which one it is, he was so unpopular with the people. Remember, one of them had the temple rebuilt and refinished, right? That was in order to buy the favor of the Jews. See, the situation was that the empire of Rome, and many of you know this, I'm not saying because many of you don't know this, but some of us don't. It's good to have a bit of a refresher. So the Roman country of Rome was taking over the whole world. They were empire building, right? So they were going into countries the way we see in the news today. Same thing, they were going into other smaller countries. They were going and just obliterating them and establishing their power. Unless they surrendered, then they could be at peace. And so the Romans, what they did is, as long as you obey us, as long as you pay taxes, you can be free to practice your religions. I think for the most part, that was fine. But you submit to us in every way that we want you to, right? And so that's why the Jews had a lot of freedom to practice their religion. Interestingly, the Romans were not allowed. They respected the Jewish religion so much that they did not bring statues of Caesar into Jerusalem and require Caesar worship there like they did in all the other countries. Because most countries were pagan anyway. They had so many gods, having one more didn't make a big difference, right? But for the Jewish people, as it would be for us, they believed in the one true, almighty, living God. So for them, worshiping, they couldn't just add another idol, right? To them was deeply offensive if an idol of Caesar would be brought into Jerusalem for them to worship. Many Christians in the first centuries were killed because they refused to worship Caesar. I think the Bible alludes to that as well. Yeah, all you had to do is take a little cup of wine, I think it was, or something, go to the altar that was dedicated to Caesar. There's a living man, the Caesar of Rome, altar dedicated to him, pour out a little bit of liquid on there, a couple of drops, and you were good. If you don't do that, we'll just kill you right now, right? That was a choice many Christians in the first centuries under the Roman Empire had to face. And so they faced it bravely, many of them, right? And so that is the kind of power. I'm off track from the Herods here, but yeah, so they had taken over Jerusalem. Now the Herods were were kind of between this. They were appointed by the Romans, right? So so he built a temple for them and all of that. We know Cornelius built a synagogue for the Jews, I think. You hear that? He was a Roman centurion. It's a different story. He was a God-fearing man. Herod was not. So this Herod was so unpopular with the people, although they had no power. He commanded, and this is a brutal story, but he commanded that when he knew he was going to die, he was getting old and sick, he was laying on his deathbed, he commanded that, I think it was, I'm not sure, was it 40 or was it 70 young men were captured and put into the stadium in Jerusalem, one of the stadiums, and he said, the moment I die, you go and you kill all the young men so that there will be mourning when I die, so that the people will be sad when I die, just to make grief. He knew the people hated him so much. And so the interesting turn of that, so that's a brutal power that these people had. That's the government under which Jesus lived at that time. And so, but interestingly, what happened, the captain in charge of that project, when Herod died, he went and he opened the gates and he let all the young men out, right? So that Mr. Herod never knew whether he was grieved or not. So it's so it just gives us a bit of a background. Even these people, the Herod family, according to what I have read, were so wicked and so immoral and so horrible. Even the Roman society, the ruling classes, society, upper society in this capital city of Rome were shocked at the behavior of Rome. They were a subject of gossip in the city of Rome. That's how wicked these people were. And that is under the government under which Jesus grew up. We know that, so then that's those people. So Jesus called Herod a fox once, right? So now we maybe know why. He was and we know how John the Baptist, some of those interactions, right? We know the reason why John the Baptist was beheaded, right? Some of those things to us would seem pretty heavy-handed, I think. Okay, so a little bit about the Roman, they just had complete power. Do you remember the taxation at the birth of Jesus? Why were Joseph and Mary in Bethlehem when Jesus was born? It's because, doesn't the Bible say in Luke 2, and all the world had to be taxed? That means every person, the whole Roman Empire in their known world, had to go to the city where they were born. and there they had to be registered. What would happen if we had to do that today? But they had no choice. Like you don't say, oh, I'd rather not, or I'd rather go next month, or I rather wanted this, doesn't make sense, or it costs too much. Mr. Caesar in Rome said, we're going to count all the people, we're going to collect some taxes, special project, everyone goes to their city to be registered. And that's why Joseph and Mary, regardless of their situation with their coming baby, regardless of whether they could afford it or not, we know they were poor because they offered only pigeons at the birth of Jesus. That all was nothing. You go to be taxed. That's the decree. And not just you. Everybody does, right? That's why the inn was full. There was no room because the whole world was traveling and doing their taxation. So that is one little thing that the Bible mentions. There was something else about taxes that we can read from history outside of the Bible. That is the way the Romans collected taxes. According to my understanding, they farmed out the taxing. So you could buy a tax contract. So if you wanted to be the tax collector for the Arberg area, you would go and you would get that contract. You'd make the arrangements with the powers that be. Then you would collect taxes. You'd have a quota. You would agree, okay, I will pay $100,000. Let's just throw a number. It would be more than that. But let's say I'll pay $1 million of taxes to you every year. And beyond that, however much they ripped off, they collected as much as they wanted. So you see Zacchaeus in that, right? He had collected up to 4 times the amount he should have, right? That's why he had his big house. That's why he was so wealthy. These people, these tax collectors, they made the deal with the Roman government, and this is how much I owe every year to pay, and beyond that you can collect however much you want. That they didn't care about that. You just make sure you pay us the amount that you owe us. So the tax collector was the debtor to the Roman. So no wonder the people hated the tax collectors, right? The New Testament is full of the tax collectors, right? They're horrible people. Zacchaeus was one of them, but he knew it was wrong, and so that's one of the things that they were living under. I think Matthew was also a publican, right, or a tax collector, if I understand. So Jesus actually had a disciple that had been like this, right? So Jesus said, "Follow me," and he got up and left his prosperous business and corrupt business and followed him. Okay, so this is just give a little bit of a. Okay, there's one other very interesting thing. There's and we know this because of what Jesus said, but the Roman soldiers could at any time, if they met you on the road, they could make you carry their baggage for a mile, right? That was the law. So it's like if today, whenever there's not even that many RCMP officers on the road. If there were like 4 or 5 times as many, whenever they met you, they could make you travel with them for 1 hour, right? Doesn't matter how busy you were, you're on your way to church, to meeting, to work, to the hospital, wherever. Now you go for an hour, you take this stuff where we want, like, kind of similar, right? It's that just absolute power. Another very important thing is that what is not in the Bible, but you can see this and you can find pictures of this, the temple at Jerusalem. So the Romans respected it very much. We know there was a wall around the inner court of the temple that no Gentiles could pass beyond that part. So the temple had an area where the Roman government was not allowed to go, right? And if they would have gone, it would have been civil war, right? So they did not. So how did they do this now? They were not allowed. They wanted peace, right? With the people. They didn't want continuous unrest. So they agreed to respect that. We will not go into the temple because Gentiles are not allowed in the temple. That would have been a defiling. So what they did, and you can see pictures of what it supposedly looked like, and you find, again, references to it in the Bible. What the Romans did, they built a big fortress, a big castle right beside the temple that was quite a bit taller than the temple. So the Roman soldiers were not in the temple, but they were up on their castle walls observing the temple. That's kind of like as if China would take over Canada and they would set up surveillance cameras in our church and it would be live all the time. So they'd be observing us all the time. That's kind of what that was like. You never hear Jesus even talking about that, but that is what they were living. Whenever Jesus was in the temple, there were always soldiers, Roman soldiers, watching them all the time. You know, when Paul was caught and there was this big ruckus going on and they dragged him out of the temple, you know that story in Acts, right? It took just a short time until the Roman soldiers were there. Why was that? They were right next door and they were there right away and they took care of that situation and they took Paul into that temple. So here we go again. We've talked a lot. there were also freedom fighters, like Jewish men who hated the Roman Empire. They were called zealots. They were also called the Sicarii. I'm not sure if I say that correctly. They were fighting against the Roman occupation with various degrees of success. It is believed that Judas Iscariot, in his name you see that Sicarii a little bit. It is believed he was a freedom fighter. And also Simon. In Luke 6 verse 15, you will see that Simon is called Simon Zelotes, and that means zealot. He was from one of these people, right? So Jesus had quite an assortment of disciples, right? So some tax collectors, and or at least one, and a zealot or two possibly. And so it's a very interesting group that Jesus had. So enough, that gives a little bit, for me, that gives a little bit of a context for what Jesus was living in, and he was in that, functioning in that society. So now we want to start with Romans 13 in our message. So the Bible says this in verse 1. Maybe we should read the verses. Romans 13. You're all there, and let me turn there yet as well. See if I can find it quickly. It says this. So this is Paul writing, so obviously after the time of Jesus, but still the same structures in place. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, and honor to whom honor. And those are verses, my friends, that I struggle with, especially over the last several years. And some of you know that we've had discussions. And so I'm talking things that I find in this chapter, but I'm also saying things that are a struggle for me and that I don't know if I completely can come to terms with for myself. But let's look at these verses a little bit, see what they say to us. And obviously, a lot could be packed into this, and we could have long discussions, and we should continue to have that. But verse 1 says, let every soul, that means you and me, be subject unto the higher powers, that means the government, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. So the power that is there is ordained by God. So you sometimes call Pastor Ronald, we call him an ordained man, right? So who has ordained him? Well, we have, but we trust God has. And so the government is ordained by God. And so I'm not sure if this means, I'd like to hear from you, it's a very important question. Does it mean that each government official carries an ordination from God? Or does it mean that the structure of government, the power of government is ordained by God? That makes a difference how we look at that, right? So I kind of like to take that the office of the government is ordained by God, but it could also mean that the officials themselves are specifically ordained. Obviously, if God did not allow them, it does say God does set up rulers and take them down. So there is that. So it could probably mean both. Today I'm taking a little bit more the path that the idea of government, of civil government, is ordained by God, but I don't disagree with the idea that it is also individual leaders. So here, when you think about your leaders, when you think about the leaders of other countries, this is what we need to realize. The higher powers have their power from God. Jesus said this to Pilate, right? When Jesus was before Pilate and his life was hanging in the balance, obviously Jesus was supposed to be crucified, so that was his plan. That's why he came, so that makes it a little bit of a special, or maybe very much a special thing. But he said to Pilate, you would have no power over me if God hadn't given it to you, right? It's the same thing that we can say to the rulers of our land. If God had not given you power, you would have no power over us, right? Their powers are ordained of God, according to Romans 13. God has instituted civil government for the order of non-regenerate humanity, right? Because without the grace of God, without the aid of the Holy Spirit, without a broken and repentant, contrite heart, we can see that. Even we ourselves struggle. How much more someone who is completely without Christ and without God has an unfixable and degenerating and evil mess that people make of it. Like when we think of the world wars, we think about what's going on in the world today. It's horrible, it's wicked and evil, right? And we don't even need to take sides to recognize that, right? It's just wicked on so many ways, and many different things, right? And so that is what happens to humanity without God. And so that is why God instituted civil government, in order to take care of that, because not everyone will be seeking after God. So that is the calling, the ordination of the government. Whosoever, verse 2, whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. So that's a very, very strong verse. It says, if anyone resists the power that God has ordained, is resisting the orders of God. Because they who resist will receive damnation. That just says that clearly. I don't like that verse, but I didn't either write it. And so what does it mean? Well, there's some thoughts we can take from that. And when I say I don't like that verse, I mean that it flies against my nature. Because the powers of the government are ordained of God, resisting them is as resisting God. Resisting them will earn damnation. So what is resisting? Can a believer never speak out or call out evil in the government? We know that the Anabaptists did that. I mean, there's a narrative that Anabaptists were just never said anything. They had very, very strong discourse with government, and obviously that was over religious things as well, or Christian doctrines and so on. For the most part, I think, as far as I know, were the subject, and so that again makes it a little bit different from maybe our personal struggles. But so there is that. But they were very, very vocal in calling out the government for their evils, and even in a very public way. They were very, very public displays of their disagreement with how things were being handled, as far as I understand. Now, we also know they were very non-resistant in a personal way when they were persecuted. One of the easiest way to catch an Anabaptist back in the day was just to ask him, "Are you born again?" And an Anabaptist would say yes. So that meant his life is over. So that's very challenging to me, right? What would I do if I were stopped at the side of the road and that was the question? Are you a Christian? And I know if I say yes. Well, not a Christian because everyone was a Christian. Are you baptized as an adult? That would have probably been the question. Are you rebaptized? If the answer was yes, that means, okay, come along, take you into the cruiser and we'll take you away. That is what they were living under. And they said, yes, I am baptized for the second time. That's very challenging, very, very challenging. It's a slightly different topic maybe, but so there was that. But they were also very open, as far as I know, about the wickedness that was going on and the control the government had over the church and things like that, as far as dictating the state church and all those things. So a question that I know that we've been asking ourselves, is a believer to have no influence on their government? I don't know. No is a very big word. I think maybe we can get to that a little bit more later, but I think we need to be very careful about if we do try to influence the government, what would be worth doing that? What would be worth doing that, like I said, Paul is using the word to resist. Resist, I think usually we would use that word when we fight against something, we are against something. It could be passive, I guess, but I think for the most part that would be an active sense of fighting against something, like the Sicarii, like zealots, or Judas or Simon. Jesus regularly called out the false religious political leaders over him, but meaning the scribes and Pharisees and high priests, because they were wicked and evil. And again, he never did. I don't think we find he did that to the Roman officials, but he did it to, and maybe that is because the Jewish leaders were supposedly representing the kingdom of God. They were doing it so falsely and they were meddling. They had made it a kingdom for themselves. So many things wrong with it. But Jesus did call them out, though he did not call out the Romans, as far as I know, or I have found. So some of the words that Jesus spoke to the Jewish leadership seem very, very hard and judgmental. And I've sometimes thought, well, Jesus talked like that. He called them hypocrites and vipers and whatever, gravestones and all kinds of things he called them. So I've always thought, well, Jesus is being cold and judgmental and harsh on them. And so that gives us permission to do it as well. But it could also be that Jesus was speaking those words in love and compassion. Like he said, well, you hypocrite, right? Like, where you want to go with this? This does not work. He could have spoken compassionately and tenderly just as well as harshly and loudly. So we don't know how he said it. But he did call them out publicly on their wickedness, the governmental authorities that were over him. He did pay his taxes, but he had been asked, hey, have you paid your taxes? Why don't you pay them? Or something like that, right? There's that story that we could read, and then he paid them. So it doesn't sound like he was at the front of the line to pay as much tax as he possibly could, but he did pay his taxes. When he was before them in judgment, he did not resist them. And obviously, like we said before, his destiny was to be condemned. His destiny was to die. Our destiny is to live and to evangelize the world, right? And so that would be a topic in itself. I'm not sure how it applies to this discussion. I think it does somewhat. But we do not find Jesus speaking out against the Roman authorities. And so that is also something to consider. But he did speak out very harshly against the religious authorities that were misrepresenting God so badly and taking advantage of their power. But the Romans were also ordained of God. Some very interesting verses in 1 Peter 2, verses 11 to 16. It says, Peter says this. I'll just quickly read the verses. It says, Dearly beloved, I beseech you as strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul, having your conversation honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may, by your good works, which they shall behold, glorify God in the day of visitation. Submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors, or unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. For so is the will of God, that with well-doing, okay, so here's God's purpose in all of this. Verse 15 in 1 Peter 2. For so is the will of God, that with well-doing ye may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men. Do you know what the ignorance of foolish men looks like? I think we've seen some of that. We want to be very careful. But maybe we all have an idea what ignorance of foolish men looks like, to a certain degree at least. With well-doing, you're supposed to put that to silence. As free, okay, verse 16. Here's, man, this is so powerful. Listen to this. As free, you're free. You're free. And not using your liberty as a cloak of maliciousness, but as the servants of God. It's a very, very strong, very, very meaningful verse, right? It says you're free. In God's eyes, you're free, but don't use your freedom. Like it's talking politically free. That's what I take out of this. We're also spiritually free. I think it's talking about politics here. You're a free people, right? Your freedom isn't given by your country. I always appreciate that thought. Like, there's a lot of talk these days about, well, give your freedom back and all those things. The government has no power to either give me or take away my freedom. But the freedoms or lack of freedoms that it institutes, I'm supposed to abide by that while I am free. I'm not supposed to take advantage. That's what I take out of this verse. You're free, and not using your liberty as a cloak of maliciousness. In your freedom, don't become malicious. Don't become malicious. But rather, live as a servant of God. Okay, what does that all mean? I would love to hear from all of you on this as well. And it is 12:01, so now I'm in a bind, right? What do you do when the preacher's in a corner? I guess we'll continue another time. It is time to go. I think there's a lot more that we can cover in this chapter, so maybe we'll do that another time. We'll see. But I think for me it has been very good to understand that we are free. But also then, we have the responsibility to do well and to have a good calling, to have a good reputation. And it does say you obey every ordinance, and that's a big challenge. I don't know if obviously we haven't gotten yet to the part where it's where we would talk about, well, what if there are ordinances that contradict other parts of the Word of God? So that's a very important part of the discussion as well, right? And so there's that part as well. So for now, let's leave it at the part that we are free, but we are not to be malicious, and we are with doing well, put to silence foolishness. All right. So let's leave it at that for the challenge for the week. We'll see if we take it further from here. Likely we will sometime. And so it's a good topic. Let's continue to discuss it. But one thing that I really would wish for myself and for you, that we could trust in the Lord, that we could trust in God. There is a future judgment coming, and it seems far away some days, right? But it will come, and it will be very real. It will be very real. So let's trust in God. I don't know what song the song leader has chosen. If you really have a good one, go ahead and sing that. But the one we sang, Be Still My Soul, would be a really good one to sing again. But that is completely up to you. That song really, I thought, fit well with what I wish that I could live in my life in this regard as well. Other things too, but on this topic. So God bless you. Let's live freely, but with honor and with well-doing. Let's have that our goal.